I didn't mean to look at his phone. I wasn't snooping, not that night. I was just picking it up from the floor because my daughter almost stepped on it. The screen lit up when I touched it, and that's when I saw the message. He's here. He's finally asleep. Just that. 10 words. But they hit harder than any full confession ever could. For a second, I didn't understand. My brain did that thing where it tries to rearrange reality into something safe, something familiar. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe it was about a coworker. Maybe God. I don't know. But then a second notification popped up. Thank you for talking him down. I couldn't handle another night like last week. My chest went cold. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on the table because I was scared I'd drop it. I could hear the shower running in the hallway. He always took long showers when he was stressed, and suddenly the sound felt like white noise swallowing the entire apartment. A sour taste crept up my throat. I felt stupid, exposed, like every moment of closeness we'd shared was being rewritten in real time. I thought, who the hell is he supposed to be? And why is he asleep somewhere that isn't here? Then the real thought hit the one I didn't want to say out loud. This isn't new. You've felt this before. You just never had proof. By the time I put the phone down, the version of my life I'd built, the one I clung to for almost 3 years, was already dead. I just didn't know what to do with the body yet. I'm 34, a project manager, a single mother of a little girl who's just starting to read chapter books and ask questions I'm still not smart enough to answer. My life isn't glamorous, but it was finally steady, predictable. And for a while, I thought he, the man I'd been dating for almost 3 years, was part of that stability. He wasn't my husband, not even my fiancé. But he was here. He slept in my bed more often than his own, or so he said. He made breakfast sometimes, folded laundry wrong, but he tried. He even helped my daughter with her homework occasionally, which made me trust him more than I should have. He played the part so well that I didn't notice how little of his world I actually had access to. He always said he wasn't ready to move in permanently because of work stress. That was his favourite phrase, work stress. It covered everything: his bad moods, his disappearances, his nights where he stared at the wall like it owed him money. And whenever I asked for something simple: consistency, clarity, actual presence, he'd sigh. He'd rub his temples. He'd tell me I was overwhelming him, expecting too much, not understanding how hard things were for him right now. I thought I was being needy. I really did. That was the part that hurts the most when I replay everything. How quickly I turned on myself the second he showed discomfort. How easily I believed I was the problem. The truth I learnt later was uglier than I ever imagined. He wasn't overwhelmed by work. He wasn't scared of commitment. He wasn't slowly building a future with me the way I convinced myself he was. He had another life, an actual one, with another woman, another home, another version of himself, calmer, steadier, more responsible, the version he pretended to be with me when it was convenient. And I was the escape hatch, the emergency exit, the place he hid when his real life got too heavy or too boring or too angry. I was the comfortable alternative, not the chosen partner. But all of that comes later. To understand how I let it get this bad, how I ignored every red flag that was practically screaming at me, how I let this man embed himself into my home and my daughter's routines and my sense of worth, you have to see how it started and how someone like me becomes someone's emergency life without even realizing it. If I'm being honest, I didn't stand a chance against him in the beginning. Not because he was some incredible larger-than-life man looking back. He really wasn't, but because he showed up at a time when my life felt like a sinking boat I was patching with tape and hope. We met through a mutual friend at a small dinner gathering. Nothing fancy, just a few adults trying to pretend we weren't exhausted from work and bills and whatever else we were juggling. He wasn't even supposed to be there. Somebody cancelled last minute and he filled the spot. I remember he walked in looking tired and a little lost, the same way I felt most days. It made him seem approachable, relatable, safe. We talked more than I expected. He asked questions, real ones, not the polite, shallow ones people throw around at parties. He asked how single motherhood actually felt, what it was like balancing deadlines with bedtime stories, what scared me, what I wished I could do if I ever caught a break. No man had ever asked me questions like that without trying to twist them into something flirty or predatory. He just listened, and I didn't realize how starved I was for that until I found myself telling him things I hadn't said out loud in years. That first night, nothing happened. We didn't even exchange numbers. But 2 days later, He found me on social media with a message that said, "You seemed tired that night, but you didn't hide it." I liked that. It was strangely validating, like he saw something in me other people overlooked. And from there, it was quick, not whirlwind quick, more like a steady, comforting drip that builds up without you noticing until you're suddenly full. He'd text me good morning. He'd ask how my meetings went. He remembered my daughter's name. He remembered the book I said I loved in college. Little things, quiet things, the kind of attention that makes you feel chosen, not chased. I wasn't in a good place emotionally back then, not that I admitted it. I'd been single for a while, focusing on my daughter and my career, telling myself I didn't need anything more. But there's a difference between not needing and not wanting, and I wanted someone, even though I hated saying that out loud. I was tired of doing everything alone, tired of being the only adult in the room, tired of thinking strength meant carrying everything in silence. So when he offered help, in small, careful doses, it was addictive. When he first came over, it felt natural. He played with my daughter for a few minutes, asked about her drawings, didn't force anything. He washed dishes without asking. He didn't make me feel like a burden. Most men I'd met acted like my kid was a complication. He acted like she was a human being. And because of all that, I put him on a pedestal way too fast. I just didn't admit it. I told myself I was being rational, taking things slow. But emotionally, I was already in deeper than I knew. I made excuses for him almost immediately. When he'd cancel last minute, I'd say he was stressed. When he'd go quiet for a day, I'd say he was tired. When he'd say he missed me but couldn't come over, I told myself he was being considerate of my schedule. That was on me. I can own that now. The first real crack happened 2 months in. He disappeared for a full 24 hours. No text, no call, nothing. I wasn't clingy, I didn't need constant communication, but we had plans that evening, and he just didn't show up. I waited like an idiot, watching a movie I wasn't really watching, checking my phone so often I started imagining vibrations. When he finally texted the next afternoon, it was something vague like, "Rough night. Sorry. Didn't want to bring my negativity to your place." And my reaction? I apologized. I told him I understood. I told him I hoped he was okay. I still cringe when I think about that. He disappeared without a word, and I apologized for being upset about it. That became the pattern. He'd drop the ball, and somehow I'd end up carrying both the ball and the blame. He'd make a joke about how emotional women were, and I'd laugh because I didn't want to seem dramatic. He'd say something passive-aggressive about how I have it easy because at least I know what I'm doing with my life, and I'd swallow it even though the comment stung for days. But I kept telling myself everyone has flaws, everyone has bad weeks, everyone shuts down sometimes. And maybe that's true, but not everyone lies the way he did. It took maybe 6 months for me to realise how carefully he curated what he told me. He talked a lot, but he never said anything real. I knew nothing about his family except vague hints about not getting along. I knew nothing about his past relationships except that they ended badly. I'd never seen his apartment. He always had an excuse: renovations, roommate drama, too messy, too far, too embarrassing. He was overly protective of his feet. Not obvious at first, he just kept it face down, always on silent. But eventually I noticed he never let it leave his pocket unless he was alone. I told myself he was private, maybe insecure, maybe anxious. I didn't want to be that girlfriend who demanded access or explanations. Looking back, he knew that, and he used it. The more inconsistent he became, the more effort he'd suddenly put in whenever I pulled away. If I got quiet, he'd show up with takeout and concern. If I seemed annoyed, he'd compliment my parenting, or tell me he felt safe with me. It wasn't affection, it was maintenance, keeping me invested just enough so I wouldn't ask too many questions. And I fell for it. My phone habits changed. I'd flinch when messages weren't from him. I'd rearrange my evenings to match his unpredictable availability. I didn't realise it, but he was becoming the centre of my emotional world, even though I barely took up space in his. The moment that should have woken me up happened on a Saturday night. He said he was working late, but he slipped and mentioned being home 5 minutes before he claimed he was leaving the office. I caught it immediately, the way you catch a strange tone in a stranger's voice. Something small, but unsettling. I asked him about it. He froze for half a second, not long enough to call it panic, but long enough that I noticed, and then he laughed. Said I'd misheard, said I was imagining things, said I needed sleep, and I let it go. But it stayed with me, buzzing in the back of my brain like a mosquito you can't find. It wasn't proof, but it was a sign, a real one, and I brushed it off, because the alternative, admitting something was wrong, felt too heavy to deal with. Looking back, that was the moment the story started to turn. I didn't know it yet, but the cracks were spreading, and everything he hid behind those cracks was already waiting to break through. I just wasn't ready to see any of it. If Section 2 was about the cracks forming, Section 3 was where everything started to split open, slowly, painfully, and in ways that made me question my own mind more than I questioned him. That was the most dangerous part. The more he pulled away, the more I clung to whatever scraps of closeness he'd toss back. I didn't realise it at the time, but I'd fallen into a pattern that felt a lot like addiction. Not to him exactly, but to the version of myself I got to be when he treated me well. And he knew exactly how to exploit that. The gaslighting didn't start suddenly. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, casual, the kind of thing you don't even register until you look back and realise, wow, I really doubted my own sanity, because this man couldn't tell the truth to save his life. It started with little comments, like the day I mentioned noticing he'd been distant. He looked at me like I'd accused him of a crime. "You're imagining things," he said. "You always overthink. It's exhausting." The worst part? I apologised. Again, I apologised for noticing his shift in behaviour. That became the script. Whenever something didn't add up, timelines, excuses, weird messages, he'd tell me I misunderstood. He'd twist his tone just enough to make me feel guilty for bringing it up at all. And when I backed down, he'd soften. He'd kiss my forehead. He'd tell me he appreciated how patient I was with him. He'd say he wasn't used to someone who didn't give up when things got hard. Looking back, he was training me. Reward, punishment, reward, punishment. And I didn't even know it. The red flags became harder to ignore around the second year. That's when his disappearing acts started happening more frequently. Not days at a time, he knew that would push me too far, but little stretches. A night here, a morning there. Times when he claimed he slept through my calls or forgot to charge his phone. He'd show up the next day with some exhausted sigh, saying he just needed space to recharge. I'd ask why he didn't just tell me. And he'd snap back with, "Do I really owe you a play-by-play of my day?" No, he didn't. But someone who loves you usually wants to keep you in the loop. I didn't figure that out until much later. The thing about patterns is you eventually start noticing them even when you're in denial. He always disappeared on Friday nights. Always had some vague excuse, late shift, co-worker emergency, helping a friend. When I asked which friend, he'd say stuff like, "You don't know them," or "It's not important." He got defensive over nothing. He got cold when I needed warmth. He got warm when I was ready to walk away. And somewhere inside me, a switch flipped. I stopped fully trusting him, even though I kept pretending things were fine. That's the moment the internal war started, the quiet, private battle where part of me wanted the truth and part of me was terrified of it. I didn't want to be right about the things I suspected. I didn't want to prove that the man I built my life around was nothing but inconsistencies stitched together with charm and excuses. But my anxiety didn't care. It woke me up at night. It made me lose weight without trying. It gnawed at me whenever he texted late or didn't answer at all. I'd scroll through our old messages, comparing how attentive he used to be with how distant he was now. I told myself relationships evolve, that things settle, calm down, lose intensity. But this wasn't calm. This was cold. And then the outright lies started. One Tuesday afternoon, I got a message from him saying he'd be tied up at work until around 9. Fine. Annoying, but fine. Except at 7, one of my co-workers who worked near his supposed office mentioned seeing him in a completely different part of town earlier that evening. I asked him about it. He didn't pause, didn't stutter, didn't even look offended this time. He just said, "She must have seen someone who looked like me." The confidence with which he lied made me feel insane. I believed him because the alternative meant questioning every moment of the past 2 years. I started checking small things. Receipts left in his pockets, timestamps on his photos, social media activity that didn't line up with his stories, little breadcrumbs he never meant to drop. Most of them pointed to nothing solid, but nothing clean either. Every clue smelled like smoke, even if I couldn't find the fire. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, mostly because I was embarrassed, partly because I didn't want someone else to confirm my fears. I wasn't ready for truth, not then. But truth doesn't wait for readiness. The reveal, the real, brutal reveal, came through someone I'd never met. It was a Thursday night. He told me he was stuck at a late meeting and wouldn't make it over. Fine. I put my daughter to bed, cleaned the kitchen, and curled up on the couch. Around 10, I got a message from an unknown number. At first, I almost ignored it, but the preview line froze me. You don't know me, but you know him. I opened it. The messages came one after another, each worse than the last. She lived with him. They'd been together for years. He'd told her he was working nights for months. He stayed with me during their fights, using my home as his space to think. She found messages between us on his old tablet. She said she wasn't angry at me at first. She thought I was just some random girl he'd entertained briefly. But then she saw the dates, the photos, the nights he said he was helping a friend move, staying late at work, or too tired to drive. He wasn't tired. He was here, with me, sleeping in my bed, helping my daughter with homework, using my life as a vacation from his real one. My lungs wouldn't expand. My hands went numb. I felt like I was falling inside my own body. I asked her one question, the one question I needed to know. Does he live with you? She replied, yes, he always has. That was it. That was the moment everything snapped. When he came over the next day like nothing happened, I confronted him. Not with yelling or dramatics. I didn't have the strength for that. I just showed him the messages. He barely blinked, barely reacted. He sighed and said, it's complicated, complicated. That was his word for a double life. He tried minimizing it, saying they were basically done, that he stayed because of financial reasons, that he didn't tell me because he didn't want to lose me. Then he flipped the blame, accused me of invading his privacy, accused me of not trusting him enough to understand the situation, accused me of creating drama he didn't need right now. I swung between numbness and rage, between wanting to hit him and wanting him to hold me, between seeing him clearly and seeing the man I thought he was. The emotional whiplash broke something inside me. By the time he left, I felt hollow, like he had scooped out my insides and replaced them with static. I didn't recognize myself anymore. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The days after the confrontation felt unreal, like I was walking around underwater. Everything was muffled sounds, thoughts, even my daughter's voice. I went through the motions of life the way someone does after a house fire, dazed, disoriented, trying to figure out what can be salvaged and what's just ash. I blocked his number the same night he left, but that didn't stop me from checking my phone every hour, expecting, maybe wanting some kind of grand apology. Not because I thought he deserved forgiveness, but because a twisted part of me wanted reassurance that I wasn't as disposable as I felt. He did try calling eventually, but from a different number, then another, and another. I didn't answer. Every missed call felt like a tiny tremor, reminding me how addicted I'd been to the version of him I created in my head. My daughter asked about him twice. Is he coming over? Did he go home? 2 simple questions I couldn't answer without choking on the truth. I told her he was busy, and she shrugged it off because kids don't understand adult betrayal, thank God. My friends weren't gentle when I finally told them. Some said they'd had a bad feeling. Some said they didn't want to interfere. Some said I deserved better, but the sentences that stuck with me were the quiet ones. You didn't do anything wrong. He manipulated you. I needed to hear those, even if I didn't fully believe them yet. For a while, I spiraled, not in a glamorous montage way, in a hollow, exhausted, messy way, oversleeping. Skipping meals because food tasted like cardboard. Scrolling through old messages just to torture myself. Replaying arguments, wondering which exact moment I'd lost my sense of reality. There's a strange kind of grief that comes from losing something you never actually had. It's heavier than heartbreak. It's humiliation mixed with loneliness, layered over self-blame you can't quite shake. As for him, karma didn't show up instantly, but it did show up. A week later, the other woman, the one he lived with, emailed me again. Not angrily, not blaming me, just tired. She told me she confronted him too. And apparently, he'd been feeding her a version of the same mess he fed me. Financial lies, emotional manipulation, half-truths, stacked on top of denials. He lost her trust completely. She kicked him out for a few days. Then he'd crawl back, promising change, only to disappear again. He didn't lose both of us because we weren't in competition. He lost both because he couldn't keep lying at the pace he'd set for himself. People like him always think they can juggle lives forever. But the truth is, they get sloppy. They always do. The real consequence wasn't dramatic, no big explosion, no revenge plot. The real consequence was that he became exactly what he'd been running from. A man with nowhere stable to land. A man living out of bags, rotating couches. A man who burned through people the moment they stopped worshipping him. It wasn't satisfying, not in the way movies make karma feel, but it was something. Rebuilding myself was much slower. I didn't wake up one day healed or empowered. Instead, it happened in tiny, almost invisible steps. The first step was telling someone the whole story, not edited, not softened, just the truth. My coworker listened without judgment. That alone felt like a small victory. The next step was reconnecting with parts of my life I'd abandoned to make room for him. Evening walks with my daughter, cooking meals that didn't revolve around his unpredictable schedule, reading at night without checking my phone every 10 minutes. I didn't magically regain trust in myself, but I stopped tearing myself apart for not seeing what he was hiding. I learned that manipulation isn't obvious when you're living inside it. It's subtle, slow, disguised as love, disguised as someone needing you. Boundaries became my new religion. Not in a dramatic way, more like instincts I finally learnt to listen to. If someone was inconsistent, I didn't rationalize it. If someone withheld affection as punishment, I stepped back. If someone's words and actions didn't match, I didn't fill in the blanks for them. I stopped clinging to potential. I started looking at patterns. Cold clarity came months later. It wasn't an epiphany or a breakdown. It was just a quiet moment, me sitting on the edge of my bed, folding laundry, realizing I wasn't waiting for him anymore. I wasn't imagining him coming back with tears or explanations. I wasn't romanticizing the few good moments we had. I finally saw the whole relationship for what it was, a man running from the consequences of his own choices, and me, offering shelter because I thought loving someone meant absorbing their chaos. But here's the thing I tell anyone listening now, whether you're in a similar situation or just scared of ending up in one. If someone only shows up when their life is falling apart, you're not their partner. You're their escape hatch. And escape hatches don't get chosen, they get used. I stayed because I wanted to believe I mattered. I ignored my instincts because I confused consistency with neediness. I accepted crumbs because I thought my daughter needed a father figure. I see all of that clearly now. It's not pretty, but it's honest. And if my story does anything for someone out there, I hope it's this. Don't wait as long as I did to question the version of love you're being handed. And don't let any